England swings like a pendulum do. Bobbies on bicycles 2 by 2. Westminster Abbey, the Tower of Big Ben, the rosy red cheeks of the little children. England Swings is a country music song, written and performed by American singer-songwriter Roger Miller. Released in November 1965, the single peaked at number 8 on the US Billboard Hot 100, but peaking at the number 13 position, it failed to make it into the top 10 in the country Miller was singing about. The song title refers to swinging London, a popular term for the youth-centric cultural scene in London during the mid-60s. If you can remember anything about the 60s, you weren't really there. So the saying goes. In actual fact, I do remember. But how I remember things living in an hour away from the bubble of London is different to what others wrote about at the time. Today, in the dark corners of the internet, claims can be found that Swinging Sixties London was an MI6 project, in cooperation with the Tavistock Institute. Let's ignore the 60s hype, take off those rose-tinted nostalgia glasses, and park those conspiracy theories for a moment, and take a look at documented threads of facts and see what kind of a tapestry they create. From the 15th of April 1966, seemingly overnight, London suddenly became the coolest city in the world. Yet the term Swinging Sixties didn't come from London or even Britain. It was first used in an American Time magazine article entitled London, the Swinging City. In the article, Hal wrote, every decade has had its city. Paris in the 20s, Berlin in the 30s, New York in the 40s, and Rome's La Dolce Vita in the 50s. But the 60s were all about London. A city steeped in tradition, seized by change, liberated by affluence. Well, that's what American Time magazine told its readers in April 1966. Let's just take a reality check at this point and take on board some facts. Despite Time magazine's belated discovery of swinging London, and Perry Haller's talk of liberated by affluence, 1966 was shaping up to be a year of looming economic crisis for Britain. An early casualty was the pop boom, as sales of popular records declined by 25% after a decade of general prosperity and 3 years of unprecedented growth. Despite its number one status, Paperback Writer sold fewer copies in Britain than any Beatles single since Love Me Do. With the economy stalling and credit tightening, nightclubs and discotheques in London and provincial towns began closing. Even the Cavern Club, the Beatles' Liverpool place of discovery, had its doors closed by the official receiver with debts of £10,000 in February 1966, only to reopen on the 23rd of July, with Prime Minister Harold Wilson and comedian Ken Dodd in attendance. Those clubs that managed to stay afloat, like the boutiques of London's Carnaby Street and King's Row, only did so thanks to the steady stream of young visitors from America and the continent, as the combination of write-ups in international press and cheap airfares, music, fashion, and films inspired a tourist boom, which brought a much-needed financial injection. So thank you, Time magazine, for inventing Swinging Sixties London, and of course those American tourists who helped the failing British economy out with those much-needed dollars. Unfortunately, in 1967 the Labour government was forced to devalue the pound, and the Time magazine front cover featured Harold Wilson with a strapline, "Britain's Money Crisis, Cause and Consequences." So all that Swinging Sixties stuff and affluence Piri Halaz was writing about in '66 didn't last. We Brits should also thank Skull and Bones man Henry Luce, the founder of Time and former Life magazines, who was a close friend of CIA Director Allen Dulles, who held that position until 1961, when President John F. Kennedy fired him after the Cuban Bay of Pigs fiasco. When Luce needed to fill the position of Vice President for Time Incorporated, it's not surprising that he chose Dulles' CIA associate, Charles Douglas C.D. Jackson. General Charles Douglas Jackson was a United States government propagandist and senior executive of Time Incorporated. As an expert on psychological warfare, he served in the CIA's forerunner, the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, and later as Special Assistant to the President in the Eisenhower administration. C.D. Jackson played a huge historical role in shaping US intelligence, particularly regarding culture manipulation. Jackson used Time Incorporated publications for psychological manipulation of societies at home, in America and abroad. After Abraham Zapruder took the famous film in Dallas on November 22, 1963, Jackson purchased it on behalf of Time Life to protect the integrity of the film. Upon viewing it on Sunday morning, he ordered it locked in a vault at the Time Life building in Manhattan. During 1953 and 54, Jackson was key in establishing the Bilderberg Group and ensuring American participation. At the time of the 1966 Swinging London edition of Time, Otto Feuerbringer was the editor. He helped increase circulation by changing the magazine's image and focusing on the counterculture and political radicalism of the 1960s. Feuerbringer had initially been a supporter of the war in Vietnam, but in 1968 he wrote an editorial conceding that the war was unwinnable. During Feuerbringer's tenure as editor, the magazine's circulation rose from 3 to 5 million. His best-known act as editor was probably his 8th of April 1966 cover story, Is God Dead?, which preceded the April 15th Swinging Sixties London edition. He did much to rejuvenate what was a rather austere publication, and once famously said of the journalism his staff did that it only had to be true this week.